Hi guys, and welcome to another episode of Kabir Considers. In this video, we're going to react to men leaving the workforce by the thousand. So, I've not heard of this phenomena, but, now that I have, I can see why. Things are just so hard, compared to, how they were 30 years ago, 20 years ago even, maybe even less, In the UK, the cost of everything has just gone like this. Whereas the, salaries are just like this. They've not moved at all. Like, I remember when I first got my first job. What was my first job? It was at Gap. I was a sales assistant. And I think I was paid like maybe, I don't know, £9 an hour, something like that. And I think that's what they pay now for their sales assistants. Maybe it's like £1 more. And we're talking over 15 years ago, So I can see why a lot of men would just withdraw because, it just feels like sometimes no matter how much you better yourself and increase your pay, it's just like everything else is just getting more and more expensive. So yeah, I'm eager to figure out why. What are the reasons for these men, withdrawing from the workforce?
Men have been steadily dropping out of the workforce,
Wow,
especially men aged 25 to 54, who are often considered to be in their prime working years. As of August 2024, 13.7% of prime-age men were not working, compared to just 7.2% in 1954.
So it's doubled.
The long-term decline in labor force participation by so-called prime-age men is a tremendous worry for our society, for our economy, and probably also for our political system.
There's a surplus of prime-age workers who could be working and aren't, and that's this puzzling problem.
The unemployment rate for prime-age working men sat at 3.4% in August 2024.
But how are these men surviving, on sort of government assistance? Because if they're not working, how are they paying for their rent, their mortgages, their food, bills?
This number primarily includes those who are unemployed and looking for a job. But about 10.5% of men in their prime working years, or roughly 6.8 million men nationwide, are neither working nor looking for employment, compared to just 2.5% in 1954.
What's surprising is it's not a COVID phenomenon, it's not a recession phenomenon.
And for every prime-age man who is unemployed and looking for a job, there are more than 3, and some years 4, who are neither working nor looking for work.
So what's driving men out of the workforce? And if left unchecked, what impact will it have on the US economy?
A big one, that's for sure.
Nearly half of prime-age men out of the workforce cited obsolete skills, lack of education and training, poor work record, or security issues as a reason preventing them from work.
Education is a very important predictor of a prime-age man's odds of being out of the labor force.
The big impacts are on the non-college educated groups on their ability to enter and stay in the labor market.
Men who are not college educated leave the workforce at higher rates than men who are. At the same time, fewer younger men have been enrolling in college over the past decade.
That's probably because if you've paid $100,000 for a college education, you're going to want a return on the investment. Honestly, these days, sometimes I think, is it really worth, going to college anymore? Unless you want to become a doctor, a lawyer, a scientist, where you have to have a degree, that education. I feel like a lot of these degrees are just not worth it. They're just pieces of paper, essentially. If everybody has a degree, is it really valuable anymore?
If you look at the geography of where the most prime-age men out of the labor force are in particular, they tend to be in places that have experienced manufacturing declines. They used to graduate with a high school education and have good, stable jobs. They weren't glamorous jobs. They were, automobile factories, sometimes mines, other manufacturing jobs, but they were respected, they were stable, and they could support a family. Since then, due to technology-driven growth, a little bit due to Chinese competition, you've had a lot of manufacturing firms and the places where they were located that were one-horse towns become ghost lands, right?
Wages could also be a contributing factor. Median annual wages for men with a high school diploma have fallen from just over $57,600 in 1973 to $45,000 in 2023,
Is this adjusted for inflation? Okay, right.
At the same time, wages for those with a bachelor's degree or more have increased by about $6,300 during the same period. This decline in earnings led to a 44% growth in the exit rate of men without a college degree from the workforce.
A lot of these companies who outsource jobs to foreign countries, yet they still expect the people in that country, in their country, to buy their products. Like, where's the logic in that? So if you offshore 10,000 jobs to Asia, yet you're expecting, sales of your cars, let's say Ford, for example, in America, if people aren't earning, where do they get the money to buy these products? That's why offshoring, it just makes me scratch my head sometimes. Like, are they not concerned about the domestic consumer, like the domestic people? Like, you can't just keep pulling jobs out of a country and expect the people to carry on buying products and spending money like normal.
Between 1980 and 2019.
I think, honestly, status plays more of a role than wages. As I said before, you had a manufacturing job. It was respected, you were part of a community, breadwinner for your family, you had organizations like unions or Rotary clubs that surrounded your job, and that's gone.
In general, men without children are also less likely to participate in the workforce compared to men with children, especially men without education or training after high school.
What we have seen is a huge rise in the proportion of prime-age men who've never been married, and a very, very significant decline in the proportion who are currently married and have kids at home. And those two trends track closely with the big changes that we've seen about male attachment in the labor force. Correlation isn't always causation, but looking at that correspondence is real important, I think.
Meanwhile, 57% of the roughly 10% of men not looking for work said their physical or mental health was the main reason for not being employed, with 55% citing a disability, serious illness, and or receiving disability benefits.
The whole question about the health and the mental health of male workforce dropouts is an extremely important and I think concerning one. Distressing proportion of the men who are out of the workforce say they're using pain medications every day.
A 2017 research paper estimates that an increase in opioid prescription between 1999 to 2015 led to about 43% of the decline in men's labor force participation rate during that period.
This is a very serious issue because at least here in the UK, pensions are paid partly by the taxes of people currently working. So if the number of people currently working shrinks, who's going to pay for the pensions of the older people? This needs to be addressed.
So then you have to ask, what sort of pain are we talking about? Are we talking about physical pain? Are we talking about metaphysical pain? There's an enormous amount of depression, mental health challenges that men in this grouping face. Some of this is a chicken and egg question. Did you drop out because you were feeling sad? Or are you sad because you dropped out and you're living on the couch?
Unemployment is really terrible for people's well-being. Often people adapt to all kinds of negative shocks, losing a kid, being widowed, whatever, and eventually kind of come back. But long-term unemployment is one of the worst things in terms of that. So what you have is a kind of scarring effect, and it's worse for men because their identity is much more wrapped up in their role as a worker.
Men's declining workforce.
Is it? My job isn't who I am. I just work for money. I'm not sure about that one.
Participation can potentially leave a lasting impact on the American economy.
It means slower growth of the economy, obviously. It means bigger wealth gaps within our society.
It certainly will have an impact on our productivity and probably already is.
The U.S. has been experiencing a severe shortage in labor, still missing 1.7 million Americans from the workforce compared to February 2020. The McKinsey Global Institute estimates that U.S. GDP could have been $296 to $442 billion higher in 2023 if the country had been able to fill its job vacancies. However, some experts suggest the impacts of men leaving or never entering the workforce could be more sector-specific.
You need young men coming in wanting to replace those people going out. And so if men have primarily been in more manual labor, more blue-skilled and skilled trades, if they're older and they're leaving into retirement and there's not as many young men coming in, both because of declining cohort sizes, but moving in a different direction type of careers, we're going to be losing that sector of productivity.
Any guys watching this that are not working, kind of basically are the men described in this video. Why aren't you working? Is it because of, disability, poor mental health, physical health, some other reason? If you feel like sharing, like why is that? I can think of a few reasons myself, to be honest. The way society is nowadays, it just, if you don't it's just like, sometimes you just think, what's the point? You bust a gut, like you work as hard as you possibly can, and a lot of the things that our parents had just don't seem attainable these days.
Despite a steep rise in federal funding, the infrastructure sector hasn't been able to find enough workers, with the construction workforce shortage surpassing 500,000 in 2024.
We are a little concerned about the impact that inflation is going to have and has had on the movement of infrastructure dollars into the actual productive activity. Having a shortage of men in construction is going to raise a problem.
The trend could have a dire socio-political impact as well.
It'll get worse in ways that we would not like. I think it would lead to more premature deaths, but it will also likely lead to radicalization and polarization, because this is a frustrated, left-behind group with no options.
It's probably going to lead to more immigration too. What they'll do is, instead of raising wages to attract domestic workers, they'll just bring more people in who are prepared to work for less wages. That's exactly what they'll do.
There are problems that government can address and problems that government can't address.
So one of the first functions that beats out policy is, economic growth. You have a strong economy, you're going to have increased wage structure, and it's going to bring people back into the market.
Exactly. Just pay people more. It's common. It's not like you don't have to be a rocket scientist to solve this issue. Pay people properly.
More than a quarter of prime age men not looking for work cited insufficient pay as a reason preventing them from work. And nearly half said competitive pay, salary, compensation, and or bonuses was a very important factor when considering whether to enter or return to the workforce.
For the young, better training, skills training, better some form of post-high school education, encouraging that, maybe even subsidizing that. I think part of the youth mental health crisis has to do with what's next. What's AI going to do? What am I going to do? Are there any stable jobs? I can't afford college. All those questions all come together. And so models that help them kind of give them a jump start can be really effective ways of intervening. And there are actually now really promising programs in high schools which teach kids financial literacy. They teach them about equitable entrepreneurship. They teach them about how do you foster better mental health as part of the workplace. And it seems to inspire kids to go on to college, right? Because they sort of see a pathway where they didn't see it before.
29% of men out of the labor force said that training and educational programs was another important factor in considering a return to the workforce.
Having the type of commitment from the employer to train and retain and offer upward mobility for workers, I think, will be very important. Trying to figure out more about career pathways in the labor market and not just the education side. So how is it that someone moves from first job, next job to best job? How do we help people understand and navigate?
Nearly a quarter of working Americans said they weren't satisfied with their growth opportunities in the workplace, compared to other OECD countries that on average spend 0.1% of their GDP on training their workers. The US spent only 0.03% of their GDP on job training in 2022.
Older age groups, it's tougher. You're probably not going to get these guys to retrain, but there are a lot of programs that have largely been pioneered in the UK, much more than here, but we're starting to pick up on them, that literally just try and reboot community activities. They get these isolated people in despair out of their houses. It can make a difference.
Social programs like
I think, don't get me wrong, what she's saying makes sense to a degree, but I think by far the number one thing is pay. If you see large scale pay increases and the cost of obviously living doesn't also rise in parallel, if people are just paid more, you'll bring these guys back to work for sure. I think that's the number one thing that they need to do.
Like disability benefits spark contentious debate.
It's very controversial. People have very strong opinions about this. While we don't know why it is happening, we can be pretty clear that the social welfare programs are helping, and the disability programs are helping to finance this situation in a way that was never originally intended.
A 2018 analysis by the Joint Economic Committee found that 64% of prime-age men who aren't working were receiving some sort of government assistance.
So the one benefit
I mean, of course, they got to survive, they need to feed
that
themselves.
they rely heavily on is disability insurance. One, because they often are unable to work if they have a physical injury or high levels of addiction or whatever. But it also provides health insurance, which is huge.
Very much against the initial intentions of the founders of the program. They've ended up with a perverse situation that too often subsidizes or even incentivizes helplessness and long-term dependence.
How much do you get if you're, obviously it depends on the disability you have, but what does somebody who's typically claiming disability benefits from the government, what do they get per month? And do they get their rent paid for or accommodation paid for as well?
Thought about a system in which we had a work-first principle where the incentives were for getting the training and then showing up at the job and then staying at the job. I think we'd be in a lot better place than we are today.
However, some experts remain doubtful about whether altering the benefits program will lead to meaningful results.
I think until we deal with the deeper problem of ill health, ill mental health, these guys aren't going to respond to incentives.
Everybody is responsible for their brothers. Everybody's responsible for their neighbors and their friends. And we ourselves as citizens can help to shine a spotlight on this. It shouldn't be America's invisible problem. And the more that we talk about it, the more that we pay attention to it, the closer we get to turning this around.
Let's read the comments. I think the comments will give us a better sort of, window into this. Let's see here. The shortage of workers line is a fallacy. There is a shortage of companies willing to pay a proper wage. That's the problem. Exactly. I'm sorry. All of the other stuff they talked about is just fluff, in my opinion. It's just fluff. They're just not they don't want to pay properly. They don't want to pay him. Let's read another comment. We're going to be losing a sector of productivity. This video is the wealthy lamenting that their workhorses are no longer buying into the system that doesn't pay fair wages. This is wonderful. I mean, because I'm sorry, all of this stuff about, people's identity is tied to their job, that's just nonsense. The majority of people who aren't wealthy work for money. They do it for money so they can look after their kids, raise their families, all of that stuff. Like, I'm sorry, that was just nonsense. Life went from working for a good life to working to barely survive, often needing help. It's not a mystery. Exactly. Corporations posting ghost jobs while claiming no one wants to work is insane. Yep, it happens here too. Yeah, we knew. It's the money. It's the money. And these people can dance around the issue as long as they like. They can, come up with these ridiculous theories about, self-worth and et cetera. Pay people properly. It's as simple as that. It's as simple as that. If the cost of living has gone up by 500% in the last 50 years and wages have basically stayed at the same level, how do you expect people to feel energized and wanting to go to work? Especially if they don't have a family to support. Of course, people are going to check out. It's just common sense. I can see there's a massive strike going on with the dock workers. Honestly, I hope they get what they want. I hope that they get their due. Thanks for watching, guys. If you enjoy my videos, please help me out by liking and subscribing.